It's Tuesday, November the 10th. Lake level's about 916 3/4, and the water temperature, it depends where you're at. River arms, mid 60s. Actually warmed up quite a bit this last week on the main lake. There's a lot of 69, 70 degree water. But we got that. I didn't do a fishing report last week. I was on the water every day. I was practicing for the FLW Toyota tournament here on Table Rock, so I didn't get a chance to do the report. But been on the water quite a bit, pretty much every day practicing real hard for the tournament. And a couple weeks ago we got a bunch of rain. Lake come up about 2.5 feet. Got real cold, and I think it's probably on my last fishing report 2 weeks ago. I actually thought the fish should be really coming up on the bank, with that big temperature change. And I fished all over the lake in practice, and the shallow bite, with the exception of the river arms, has pretty well eluded me. And even in the tournament, I think in the top 10, the last day, I think there's only one guy that consistently caught them shallow. Now, I've been able to catch some smallmouths down lake, with Kimberling down to the dam, in the first hour or so on a Ned rig, on a 3/16. I've been mixing up between an 1/8 ounce and a 3/16. 5-fish ultimate Ned jig head with a Strike King Zero, either green pumpkin or dirt. Normally this time of year, the smallmouth get real consistent. We catch them 20 foot or less. The only consistency I can get is in the morning, and it just seemed like it was the first hour or so. So anyways, during practice in the tournament, like I said, I fished all over the lake, trying to get a shallow bite going. Could never really get much of it going except for down lake with the smallmouth. A lot of days we had wind. I tried crankbaits. The only thing consistent I could get going was a deep bite, and it's been, extremely deep. Football jig, and a lot of those fish have been anywhere from 35 to 45 feet deep. And a spoon bite. Actually been getting an Alabama rig bite too, but I caught a lot of non-keepers on it. I couldn't get anything consistent on it as well. But a lot of the deep bite had been on, main lake gravel, bluff ends, and you had to jump around to a lot of different spots. And even when you found them, it wasn't like you found a lot of them. It's still, I think, been a grind. I pretty much know it's been a grind, because to make the top 10, it took 21 pounds, a little over 10.5 pounds a day, which is pretty much just 5 keepers. First day of the tournament, I only had 3 keepers. Second day, I think I had second or third heaviest stringer, which wasn't very big. It was just 13.5 pounds. But, it had been, a limit had been gold if you could catch 5 keepers. So anyways, I also found a lot of bait in the center of the creeks, up in Ants Creek area, some up in the White River, and a lot of them down lake. And normally this time of year, fall into winter, we look in the center of a lot of the deep creeks. If you find the shad, you're usually going to find the fish around them. And I did find a couple groups of fish, and I also found some down lake, down Indian Point area. Well, the first day of the tournament, I came up to the mid-river, and I'm going to back up a little bit, but I had also been catching a few fish out of brush piles, but the brush piles had to be, really deep, 25 to 40 feet on a jig, 3/4 ounce jig. So those were a little bit better fish, so I came up here, did that for several hours, went to the creeks that I had a lot of shad in, and I could see fish worming up and down in them. Finally started catching some, and they were big white bass. I'd catch 4 or 5 big old white bass, then I'd catch a largemouth or Kentucky, and they were just short fish. And what I was catching a lot of them fish on, a lot of times this time of year, it seems like the fish start to get off the drop shot, where a jig and spoon, I was using a 3/4 ounce white spoon, and Rapala ice fishing jig is a real big deal, and it will be throughout the winter. But I was kind of surprised that they started getting on this, this early in the fall. And actually, I didn't figure that out till the first day of the tournament, where I was really struggling. I started finding some of these fish over deep trees and some of them in docks. Some of my dock fish on the spoon, a lot of times, we fish the ends of them deep docks and the fish are suspended. Well, most all my spoon fish came off of the bottom. It seems like if I was in 25, 35 foot range, there'd be a smallmouth. 35 to 45, there'd be spotted bass. And all my better largemouth came as deep as 50 to 60 foot, whether they were on the bottom, in brush piles, or in treetops. Another thing that caught a few fish on, and we throw quite a bit, this is an old Little George with the hooks built right into it. And there's a lot of different tail spinners out there. I like to use the tail spinner. The line goes through the bait. You tie it onto the hook. This one here weighs 3/4 of an ounce. A lot of times when you've got a setup like this that's heavy, the fish can throw the bait pretty easy. When you got the line that slides through the bait and then you tie it onto the treble hook, you don't seem to lose as many fish. But these baits here, try to figure out how deep the shad are, work the bait underneath the shad. Most of the fish I caught in the tournament, especially the second day, I caught several keepers, got the cull several times, but I probably wouldn't have caught them fish if it wasn't for the Garmin live scope. Most of those fish I was live scoping. I'd be out in the center of the creek. If I'd see a few fish that I could vertical fish, I'd drop down to them, but most of them I would see 40 to 60 foot away from the boat, and I could cast either the Little George or the jig and spoon, and sometimes even the Rapala ice fishing jig. Now, usually on the spoon, we fish it pretty aggressively, excuse me, but on this ice fishing jig, I fish it a little bit more like a drop shot. And this is a 7/8 ounce, and I'll usually mix up the colors. They do make a smaller one that's a 5/8 ounce too. I'll mix up the different size baits. And usually I'll throw them on anywhere from 12 to 17 pound line. And the same with the spoon. If I'm throwing the smaller ice fishing jig, I like to throw it on 12 pound, and even if I downsize to a 1/2 ounce spoon, 12 pound will work good. But when I'm fishing treetops or brush piles, I like the 16, 17 pound line. That way if I get the bait stuck, I can maybe just straighten the hook out and get my bait back. And I like to throw it on either a 6'10" or 7 foot, medium heavy rod. I use the same rod. Actually, it's a Lew's. It's a spinnerbait and buzzbait rod. It's a medium heavy. It's got a soft tip. I use the same rod whether I'm flipping it in the docks or vertical fishing it. I don't want a rod that's real stiff. I want something that's got a little tip action, especially on that ice fishing jig where I can just kind of jig it up and down. But you can also fish a lot of them docks with a football jig as well, especially when they're on the bottom. You got to get that jig way back up in there and feed line, let it go to bottom, work it back out real slow. I still think there's going to be a shallow bite. We'll see. But normally, like I said earlier, the smallmouth get real consistent when that water starts to cool down. And up through to Thanksgiving, we've always got a group of deep fish that'll stay deep all winter. But normally we have a migration of smallmouths and largemouths that'll come up shallow and stay up there till that water gets, below 50 degrees. Haven't really seen that yet. I thought we were going to see it last week after the front came through in the rain. But, the fishing is still, I think, really tough for the most part. But the thing that is getting better is, these fish that are in the center of the creeks. The bad deal about them fish that are in the center of the creeks, they move a bunch. I don't know if so much the fish move, but the bait's moving. I think a lot of them fish live in them treetops in the center of the creeks, but when the bait's not in that area, the fish are pretty inactive. But when the bait's up and cruising around, there'll be some fish up there feeding with them, and it's kind of a day-to-day thing. Sometimes you'll see the bait up, 15, 20 foot up in the water column. If I see that, I'll pick up a little 1/4 ounce like a 3.5 or 2.8 little Kitech or a Rage swimmer striking on anywhere from an 1/8 ounce to a 1/4 ounce head. Drop the bait down 10 or 15 foot and swim it through that shad. And a lot of times the bottom depth is totally irrelevant. I mean, you might be setting in 120 feet of water out in the center of them creeks. The bait and the shad may be 30 feet, 40 feet. What you want to look for a lot of times if you're seeing that bait and stuff out there, if you don't see any fish underneath the bait, try to mill around with your electronics and find some trees that come up to about, anywhere from 30 to 50 foot from the surface. And try to key on them treetops with the spoon or the ice fishing jig. And, that bite, like I say, I think it started a little earlier, but that should stay pretty consistent, throughout the winter. But like I say, the guys got to search around. They move from day to day. Looks like the weather's going to be really gorgeous this weekend. There's been a lot of bait up in the river arms. I'm finding a lot of gar around them. Some days I can get 1 or 2 good quality bites, but I haven't got anything consistent as far as up in the river arms underneath the bait. The most consistent bite has been pretty much the dam area, from Kimberling City to about State Park in those big creeks up in that area. I have not done it up in the White River, but it should be working up there as well. So till next week, good luck, good fishing.